Hello and welcome to my video. So please do like and subscribe if you aren't already. So as you can see, I'm actually in my home studio. I have my greyhound who seems to be trying to read my books here at the back, and she's padding on the floor and making a noise, so I'm sorry about that. And I am not set up yet. I reckon it's going to take me another week to get myself all organised. I've still got stuff to bring back from the mill studio, and trying to work out how to fit it all in so it doesn't get completely overloaded is now the trick really, and so I'm going to have to be quite ruthless. But what I wanted to do today is, last week you will recall I was out in the landscape doing some pastel and ink work and talking about how I was continuing with this 100-day project, just small studies I've been doing, and I'm obviously very behind with it because in theory it kind of finished in May, and I've just been using it as a way of keeping going with exploring inks and pastels. So I've got 100 small pieces of work, and so what I thought I would do is a walk through the sketchbook today, and so in a minute I'm just going to put the camera overhead so I can share with you a flick through, and just to make some kind of comments and observations really as a way of narrating that. If you have been on here for a while, you'll know the story. I've been moving from a mill studio to a home studio, and so that's where I am now, and that's what this backdrop is. And so because of that, I haven't really released a newsletter recently, and so very soon I will be releasing one with lots of updates. So if you're not subscribed, I'll put a link in the notes of this video so that you can subscribe if you're interested. The newsletter isn't something that I send out hugely regularly. I send it out monthly to 6 weekly. And this one has been a long stretch because of this move. And what I do in that is I release new works usually to newsletter subscribers first. I share more about my practice. You get to hear about workshops and new exhibitions and art fairs that I'm doing, and tickets and so on. So there's benefits of subscribing. Okay, so this is going to be a whistle-stop tour. So I started with this cartridge paper, Sea White of Brighton, chunky sketchbook, and in here I just did swatches of the unison pastels I was going to be using, and I started looking at other pastels which I subsequently disregarded, and then did some swatches of the inks. These are all Liquitex inks, and I subsequently started using Senolia inks and other inks, and then just doing sort of samples really. This is just ink work, and then I started combining them in small studies, and what I was doing here, and I've continued to do, is taping the pages. So this is just looking at just using a couple of pastels, a couple of inks, which I still think is probably optimal. If you start using too many, it kind of gets quite busy and you lose the plot a little bit with it. So these are quite nice and impactful. I'm using opposites on the colour wheel. I quite like these desaturated colours and muted colours. And then I was just playing around combining both. And as you can see, it's quite buckled, the paper. These were the last studies I did where I was looking at the grasses and using again just a couple of inks. These are Senolia inks and the pastels. And then I subsequently reverted to a different sketchbook. So that just gives you a sort of a way in really. And then I realised that paper wasn't really doing me any favours. And so I reverted to this sketchbook, which is an indigo sketchbook from Artway. And hopefully, if I just get it straightened up, that's it. So I started with just playing around. This was in the studio, and I was just using inks and pastel over the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through fairly quickly, but I'm going to just try and give you a bit of narrative of how these came about and what I was looking at. So these were all done, all of them are in here are taped so that I get the nice clean edges, which I really like, against the contrasting different edges of the marks of the inks and the pastels. So here I was just looking at opposite colours broadly on the colour wheel. I was looking at creating expanses of ink and then putting marks over the top. And the reference really is the panoramic view of mine. And I was playing around with colour at this point and all different marks. There wasn't any more of a focus than that. I was just getting used to using them. And then subsequently I went out in the landscape. So some of these are out in the landscape, some of them are in the studio from memory. I sometimes find it easier to be a little bit more abstract by being in the studio. I've throughout the book, you'll see I've tried using a block colour ink usually, but this is actually pastel to the corners, which I'm not sure I really like, so I'm not necessarily going to be continuing with that. I was playing around here with the diffuseness of the inks, and I was spraying the paper before adding the inks, and I was always working over the top. I do like seeing the contrast of the different marks that you get with the media, so scratchy, strong lines against the diffuseness of the inks is always really nice. I went into the woodland, so there's different subjects here, not just the panoramic view. Went into the woodland and did these. I think they're too busy. I do like, though, the strong colours and marks, but I just think there's too many things going on. This one is a little bit better because it's simplified, and I like the repetition of things that kind of connect it together. These ones were done, some on location, some back in the studio with the reference of the heather moors. I'm not really a fan of them, to be honest. I like this one because I like the contrasting marks of them. So this was done, actually, I'll just turn this around because it was done upside down by accident. This was done actually on the coast, so that's a completely different subject matter. And I became very fascinated by the lobster pots. So these are referencing the sea, and the buoys, the orange buoys, and the lobster pots. And I will turn it around again, and then you can see. What I am going to do with these is I'm going to actually write a review of my own, so that I can write what I learned from it, what I'm interested in progressing. So these ones, the reference of the lobster pots and the buoys, I'm liking the colour contrasts. I never think that any of the studies in this book with the long have really worked. It almost looks like I've done two halves, which I'm not keen on. I think this is possibly the most effective because it's most abstract, and I quite like that. I've taken that to a next level, but I think I could have used the marks more effectively. This wasn't very successful at all. I was looking at the buildings. I kind of lost the plot with it, but I like some of the marks and the contrasts. This one is getting more interesting. I'm now starting to create depth, looking at depth. I'm not liking the blue as I referred to before, but I was trying it out, and this is again pastel. I like the idea of having the diffuseness and blocks of ink to which you add marks over the top. You get a sense of the depth and the scale by doing that, I think. So that's quite nice. More of that here. I'm not a fan. I started to try and see how I could push the graphics. I'm not a fan of when it gets to this sort of stage, because I don't really know what that doesn't seem to give a feel of the landscape for me. It's getting too kind of graphical. This does, and I quite like the different hard edge against the soft edges and so on going on there. This page I'm particularly keen on because I'm starting to use the inks in more interesting ways, and you're starting to see how you can create different edges and marks, whether you dilute them, whether you spray them, whether you use them neat. Probably too many hard edges going on in some of them, but this is really nice where you've got that real softness, diffuse line against a really hard edge. And I'm liking the way the colours are working. I love this saturated bright red against the desaturated green, and the white space sort of bleeding into from different parts of the image. So I think gives it a real breathability and a real feel of landscape without them being literally landscape. And this I like, where I'm working over with lines. The lines working over I think often works for me, and I like this kind of graininess. This is getting a little bit too much in a way, too blocky, too, I don't know, there's a sort of a harshness about it. The thing that's interesting is there is a depth to it, but I'm not so keen on those. Similarly with these, I'm just playing around with the different layering and different effects of the inks and the marks with the pastel, trying to create different effects and depths. So this is quite interesting, watching it bleed in, so it kind of is diffuse and then this sort of strong block in contrast, and then versus the very faint outline. It's almost too busy, that image, but I quite like some of the things that are going on with it. Similarly for here. This is where I started going out into the landscape and looking at the rhododendrons and how I could combine that in the study. And this is quite interesting because it's quite sort of, there's some diffuseness and some harshness, but overall I think they're a little bit too busy. They were done out in the landscape. I like the way I'm exploring the different marks and contrast. I'm not sure about the way the white space, when it bleeds in from different sides, seems to work quite well. I'm not so sure about that. I'm liking the combination of colours. Again, this cornering I don't like at all. This, I think I like the boldness of it, and I like the way the inks are bleeding in, and I like the way the colours are coming over the top. What I don't like is the fact that there's no variety in the ink and it's just far too blocky. And if I had more diffuseness, was using different techniques with the ink, so spraying with water, diluting, I wouldn't have this just big blocks of just single colour, which I think is very flat, which inks can be if they're not pushed. These, not very successful but interesting studies to see what can happen when the inks blend. But it's again two halves, again too much of two halves. There needs to be more of a single image about it. And then coming on to finish with the grasses. So these are really quite interesting. You'll have seen some of these before from a previous session I did where I was doing some of them in the landscape. I'm liking these because they're simplified. I'm not over egging it with the inks, although I'm pushing them to do different things. So you've got hard edges, soft edges, white space coming in, and then different marks coming over the top. If anything, I could have got more variety into the ink effects, but not too bad. This is interesting. This is where it's diffuse and then the hard edges, quite like that. These ones you saw me do last week, those are completely overworked. I quite like the strong, bold shapes against the spideriness of the marks coming over. And then I've done more of these. This is where I was trying to get a different effects with the ink, so I quite like that with a dry effect against the more looser. And again, not liking that, but I'm quite liking it here. So it's just when it goes up to the top edge and it looks like a square that I don't like it, but I quite like the solidness. And I like it when I've got this real contrast of the use of the material. So the ink really differently used there to how it's been used here. And then the pastels coming over and providing that oomph for it, and layering, I think, is what I'm really liking the pastels for. And then there's some just final 2 pages. This one I particularly liked because it was simplified and it was bold, and I was using the inks in different ways and the pastels in different ways. So that's what I was sort of striving for in a way. Some of these things are interesting, but there's a little bit too much bleeding going on. I quite like that, but too many different inks used. It'd be much better if I just used a couple of inks. Just too many things really. And then this final page, more of exploring how I could push the inks but keeping it minimal. So this is the Paris red ink from Wallace Seymour, and then this is a Senilia yellow ink, and then using the pastel over. And I'm you know, it's the thing is, it's what I need to do now. This is the first time I've really gone through and shared it. What I'm going to go through now is I'm going to go through and write notes for myself on what I'm learning, what works, what doesn't work so well, and so that I can take that information into future work. But I do think it's been a really useful way of exploring materials on a regular basis. And using a sketchbook has kept it from being too overwhelming. So I hope that's been useful. Thanks very much for watching, and please do like and subscribe if you're not already, and I'll catch you next time. One thing I didn't say is I will be giving a little tour of my home studio once it's fully set up. It's just that it's not quite there yet. But hopefully in the next week or two it will be. Okay, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.